Imagine an entire city, frozen in time, with streets lined with ancient buildings, ornate carvings still intact, and structures that have stood for over 600 years, all hidden beneath 40 meters of water where sunlight barely reaches. This isn't Atlantis or some legend from mythology. This is Shi Cheng, the Lion City of China, and what happened to it is one of the most controversial decisions in modern history. By the time I'm done telling you this story, you'll understand why thousands of people were forced to abandon their homes, why the Chinese government deliberately drowned an irreplaceable piece of history, and why divers who venture into this underwater time capsule say it's like swimming through a ghost town where the past refuses to die. The year was 1959, and China was in the midst of massive industrialization under Chairman Mao's rule. The country needed power, and they needed it desperately to fuel their growing economy and ambitious modernization plans. The solution was to build a hydroelectric dam on the Xiamen River in Zhejiang province, creating what would become Qiandao Lake, also known as Thousand Island Lake. It was an engineering marvel that would provide electricity to the region and help transform China into an industrial powerhouse. But there was a problem. Actually, there were two problems. Two ancient cities stood directly in the path of the planned reservoir. Shi Cheng, founded over 1,300 years ago during the Eastern Han Dynasty, and Shi Cheng, another historical city nearly as old. The government faced a choice: abandon the dam project and find another location, or sacrifice these cities to progress. And here's what makes this story so haunting. They chose progress. Within months, the order came down. Every resident had to leave. We're talking about hundreds of thousands of people who had to abandon homes that had been their family for generations, pack up whatever they could carry, and reset their lives elsewhere. Can you imagine being told that your entire city, your history, your ancestral homes, everything you've ever known is going to be deliberately flooded and erased from the map? That's exactly what happened. In 1959, the floodgates opened and water began filling the valley. Slowly, methodically, the rising waters consumed everything. First the streets, then the first floors of buildings, then entire structures disappeared beneath the surface. Within days, both Shi Cheng and Shi Cheng were gone, submerged under what would eventually become 40 meters of water. The lake that formed, Qiandao Lake, is massive, covering about 573 square kilometers with over 1,000 islands dotting its surface. These islands are actually the peaks of mountains that once surrounded the cities, now transformed into a scenic tourist destination that attracts millions of visitors each year. But beneath those beautiful turquoise waters lies something extraordinary that most tourists never see. For decades, Shi Cheng was forgotten. Out of sight, out of mind. The hydroelectric plant did its job, the lake became popular for tourism, and life went on. The submerged cities became little more than a footnote in local history, remembered only by those who had been forced to leave. But then, in 2001, something remarkable happened. The Chinese government authorized a diving expedition to explore what remained of the underwater cities, and what they found shocked everyone. Instead of finding ruins destroyed by decades underwater, divers discovered that Shi Cheng had been almost perfectly preserved. The cold, dark water at that depth, combined with the lack of sunlight and oxygen, had created conditions that prevented decay. The city looked almost exactly as it had the day it was flooded. Wooden beams were still intact. Stone carvings were sharp and clear. Entire streets could be followed from building to building. It was as if someone had pressed pause on history and left it there, waiting to be rediscovered. But here's where it gets even more incredible. Shi Cheng wasn't just any city. It was known as the Lion City because it was located at the base of Wushi Mountain, which translates to Five Lion Mountain. The city was built during the Eastern Han Dynasty, around the year 208, making it over 1,800 years old when it was flooded. During the Ming and Qing dynasties, it became an important cultural and political center, and the architecture reflected that significance. We're talking about 5 city gates, each with a tower that once stood proudly above the walls. We're talking about 6 main stone streets that connected different districts. And most impressively, we're talking about over 260 structures that featured intricate stone carvings of phoenixes, dragons, and lions, each one a masterpiece of craftsmanship. The level of preservation is mind-blowing. Divers have found memorial arches with inscriptions still readable, detailing the accomplishments of prominent families and historical events. They've found decorative roof beams carved with such precision that you can still see the individual scales on dragons and the feathers on phoenixes. They've found doorways, windows, staircases, and entire room layouts preserved as if the residents had just stepped out for a moment and never returned. In some buildings, you can still see the marks where furniture once stood, the grooves where doors used to swing, the details of everyday life frozen underwater. Would you dare to dive into a city that's been underwater for over 60 years, swimming through streets where thousands of people once lived, worked, and died? It's an experience that divers describe as both exhilarating and eerie. The visibility underwater is limited, usually only about 10 meters even with powerful lights, which means the city reveals itself gradually as you swim through it. Buildings loom out of the darkness like ghosts. Fish swim through windows and doorways. Algae clings to ancient stone. It's beautiful and unsettling at the same time. But here's a question that nobody asked in 1959, but everyone's asking now. Was it worth it? Was the electricity generated by that dam worth sacrificing 2 ancient cities and displacing hundreds of thousands of people? And here's where opinions get really divided. Some argue that China needed that power to develop, to lift millions out of poverty, to build the modern economy that exists today. Without projects like this, they say, China wouldn't have become the global powerhouse it is now. Others argue that you can't put a price on history, that once you destroy something that stood for nearly 2,000 years, you can never get it back, and that there were other ways to generate power that didn't require such an irreversible sacrifice. The discovery of Shi Cheng's remarkable preservation has reignited this debate because now people can see exactly what was lost. This wasn't just a collection of old buildings. This was a complete, functioning historical city with architecture and artistry that took centuries to create. And while it still exists underwater, it's not accessible to most people. Only trained divers with special permits can visit, and even then, the conditions are challenging and potentially dangerous. The general public has to rely on photographs and videos, which, while impressive, can't fully capture what it's like to be there. In recent years, there have been proposals to make Shi Cheng more accessible. Some have suggested building underwater tunnels with viewing windows so tourists could walk through parts of the city without diving. Others have proposed submarine tours that could navigate the streets and give people a closer look at the architecture. There have even been ideas about partially draining the lake to expose portions of the city, though this would be incredibly expensive and would defeat the very thing that's been preserving Shi Cheng all these years, the water itself. Here's something most people don't know. The lack of sunlight and oxygen at that depth is what's kept Shi Cheng so well preserved, but it's also what makes it so fragile. If you were to drain the water and expose the city to air and light, the wood would begin to rot, the stone would start to erode differently, and centuries of preservation could be undone in just a few years. It's a catch-22. The water that hides the city is also protected, and any attempt to make it more visible could destroy it. But technology might offer a solution. In recent years, divers and archaeologists have been using advanced underwater cameras, 3-dimensional scanning equipment, and virtual reality technology to create digital models of Shi Cheng. These models allow people to explore the city virtually, walking through streets and examining carvings in detail without ever getting there. It's not the same as being there, but it's a way to preserve the city digitally and share it with the world without risking damage to the physical structures. Some of these virtual tours have been made available online, allowing millions of people to visit a city that would otherwise be accessible to only a handful of divers each year. The story of Shi Cheng has also become a powerful symbol in China's ongoing conversation about development versus preservation. In the decades since the city was flooded, China has demolished countless historical neighborhoods and ancient structures to make way for modern development. Cities that were once filled with traditional architecture are now dominated by high-rises and shopping malls. But there's been a growing movement to preserve what remains of China's architectural heritage, and Shi Cheng has become a rallying point for these efforts. It's a reminder of what happens when you prioritize short-term economic gains over long-term cultural preservation. And here's a detail that adds another layer to this story. Some of the people who were displaced from Shi Cheng are still alive today. They're elderly now, but they remember what the city looked like before the flood. They remember their homes, their neighborhoods, the temples they visited, the markets where they shopped. For them, Shi Cheng isn't just an underwater archaeological site or a tourist attraction. It's their childhood, their history, their lost world. Some have been interviewed by journalists and documentary filmmakers, and their stories are heartbreaking. They talk about how they weren't given a choice, how compensation was minimal, how they struggled to adapt to new places that never felt like home. There's a particularly poignant account from an elderly woman who was a teenager when her family was forced to leave. She describes how her father, who was a stone carver, spent his last night in Shi Cheng carving their family name into the doorway of their home, hoping that someday, somehow, someone would find it and know that they had lived. Decades later, when divers began exploring the city, they found that carving, still intact, still readable. When the woman was shown photographs of it, she broke down in tears. Her father had been gone for years, but his work, his defiant act of memory, had survived. This human element is what makes Shi Cheng more than just an interesting curiosity. It's a story about the cost of progress, about what we're willing to sacrifice in the name of development, and about how the past has a way of resurfacing, sometimes literally, to remind us of what we lost. The city may be underwater, but it's not gone. It's there, waiting, preserved by the same water that was supposed to erase it. Today, Qiandao Lake is one of China's most popular tourist destinations, known for its clear water, scenic islands, and recreational opportunities. Hotels line the shores. Tour boats ferry visitors from island to island. And few of the tourists have any idea that they're floating directly above one of China's most significant historical sites. There's a strange disconnect between the cheerful vacation atmosphere above the water and the silent, submerged city below. It's as if two different worlds occupy the same space, separated by 40 meters of water and 60 years of history. The future of Shi Cheng remains uncertain. Will it stay hidden forever, accessible only to a privileged few? Will technology eventually allow more people to experience it safely? Or will changing environmental conditions or political priorities lead to new decisions about how to handle this underwater treasure? Nobody knows for sure, but one thing is certain. Shi Cheng has captured the world's imagination in a way that few archaeological sites ever do. There's something deeply compelling about a city frozen in time, about history preserved by accident, about a place that was supposed to be forgotten but refused to disappear. If you ever find yourself in Zhejiang province, looking out over the peaceful waters of Qiandao, take a moment to think about what lies beneath. Think about the thousands of people who once called Shi Cheng home, about the artisans who carved the dragons and phoenixes, about the generations of families who lived, loved, and died in a city that now exists only in memory and in the cold, dark water. Think about what we're willing to lose in the name of progress, and what we might be losing right now, in our own time, without even realizing it. Because Shi Cheng's story isn't just about the past. It's about the choices we make today and the legacies we leave for tomorrow. The Lion City still roars from beneath the waves, and if we listen carefully, we might just hear what it's trying to tell us.